Hey everybody, how's it going out there? So, second thing I wanted to talk about is just basically general gist of socializing at conventions and stuff like that. As I mentioned in the previous video, I was at MFF 2011, and I've been to 3 MFFs before 2016. So the first one was MFF 2011. Now, what I didn't mention in the other video is that MFF 2011 was kind of probably my worst convention. And there's a very, very particular reason for that. And it's a very important thing to discuss when talking about conventions and going to conventions. And that is, basically, I didn't really have anyone to go with. I basically had a room all to myself. My first convention, I had somebody to go with. In fact, the only reason I went there was because the person asked me, do you want to go to this convention? And I went, sure. And it was funny who it ended up being, because it wasn't anyone I expected. But I'll leave that as it may. But that person being there and not really being experienced with the fandom and its, and the who's, kind of let me be like an exposition dump, like, oh, this is this person, this is what they do, and this is that person, this is what they do. So it kind of gave me something to kind of focus on other than just the whole convention space itself, and it kind of gave me a sense of purpose there. Even though I didn't really know anyone directly, and, I did at least know the person I was with very, very directly. So I had somebody to, discuss and talk with. Since PCD hits pretty hard after your first few conventions, I was like, oh man, I got to go to another convention because it's like I really like the experience of the first one. So I went to MFF 2011, but I went by myself. I didn't have anything planned. Basically, it was just like it was a post-con depression decision, and I ended up regretting it because I didn't go with anyone, and I didn't really have anything planned. And back then, I really didn't contribute too much, so I didn't really have much to talk about. I was just getting into... I don't think I was a writer for Furry yet, even. I was probably just getting off the ground there. I didn't have any written works, and I wasn't really much a contributor. I was very much just a fan, in the fandom. So my suggestion to you is that if you're going to a convention, make sure you have a good solid foundation of people that are going, like at least one or two people that you're going with. Share a room with somebody, and my suggestion would be is to know that person for at least a year before you share a room. There's a lot of horror stories out there where, you have, somebody's like, oh man, I just randomly shared this room with this guy I met like 3 weeks ago, and they party a little harder than I thought they would, and they're not respecting my space, and so I just wanted to get out of that room and blah blah blah. So I've heard horror stories like that at least once a convention, so be sure you know the person, be sure that you've had extensive interaction with them to know whether or not you're compatible. It's sometimes even hard to know that over the internets because they could act differently in the real world, you never know. But if you are going to take that chance, it's better that than having a room to yourself because it gets depressing. Especially if you don't know a lot of people there and you start wandering to convention halls and then you go to a panel every once in a while, you go to a event, but you still experience it alone. The MFF 2011 was my worst convention because I didn't seek out, I didn't have any connections to anyone really. So that being said, the furry world is a very small world. Even at the largest conventions, as soon as you if you're there for a little bit, you'll realize just how small this furry world is. Because one of the coolest things that happened during the convention this year was we had a new fourth person as a roommate. I usually spend my time with two other individuals, Splunker, Sal, and Dreamus. And so I spent time with those two, and they had a new fourth roommate, and we introduced, we brought them into the fold, and it was through this fourth person, that they're like, well, I don't have any dinner plans, and they're off doing their own thing. Our other two roommates are doing their own thing. That's kind of a tradition of theirs to go out and eat. So it's like, do you want to go out and hang with some of my friends and eat? And I said, sure. It's like I didn't have anything planned anyway. So we go down to introduce ourselves, and what ends up happening is that it's like, this is like we do the standard introductions, like, this is Tantra. It's like, that name sounds familiar. Like, the one guy goes, this name sounds familiar. And I go, really? Oh, kangaroo. And he goes, do you remember werewolf guy? And I'm like, oh yeah. It's like, and it was on Second Life, and it was basically this guy who, this random guy who was part of this group was named Furry, who I knew from a club that was run out of the Second Life back in the mid 2000s, when it was kind of a big thing. Back in my college days, I sort of hung out on Second Life as a bouncer for this club called the Furry Vermin. See, it's a Roo. I'm a bouncer. Get it? It's funny. But so I knew a lot of friends from there that I still talk with every once in a while. Fringe, and Brand Strangelove, and Taven Murat, and Bounder, he's known as. And I still keep in contact with a lot of those guys, and I know some of them are subscribed to this channel. Thank you very much for doing so. But it was kind of cool to see how small the furry world is that sometimes when you keep moving forward in them, even as big as a convention as it is, and as big as it is getting, the furry world is very much one where if you move forward, even if you don't mean to, the world will wrap in on itself, and eventually you're going to find yourself running into somebody that you didn't expect to from your past that you just interacted with online, regardless of anything else. So it was really cool meeting Furry for the first time, even if it was in a coincidental manner. And speaking as Furry as a community, it's like it is really hard to explain to people. It's like why people are getting into these kind of things. And, sometimes the world just seems like it's too big and you can't really contribute. But when you get down to it, like, everyone does have their part, even if they don't really expect it. Even if they thought that they were just playing a small role, out there. People will remember, if you contribute and you do good things, people will remember you for it. And the furry fandom is no different. And a lot of people, people as a group go, we need to be charitable, we need to do all these things as a community. And the furry fandom does allow people an outlet to do that. And I guess I'll bleed into the whole charity drive. I was pleasantly surprised this year about the charity. And I'll tell you why that is. 2 years ago, MFF rose about $20,000-ish for their charity back in 2014 when that event happened, which is a whole other can of worms, which ain't going to be talked about here because it's kind of been talked about enough. I guess I'll share my story about being part of that event, of that issue, one day, but not today, and not during this series of videos. But they contribute $20,000, which at the time was a great thing. 2015, they went crazy. It was the veterans it was the veterans charity, and basically the veterans charity was like the forgotten soldier, basically. Like, it wasn't like a forgotten soldier, but it's like basically like it was to deal with military dogs and finding them homes and helping them rehome and deal with post military, how to deal with the post military dogs without being because it's a really thing. I can't remember what the charity was called, but there's interesting stories around that particular charity because it is a more conservative sort of like pro-military organization, So there was kind of this fun little mismatch between, the philosophies of those in the fandom versus the philosophies of those. But that common ground of, looking out for the animal in those situations interestingly bridged a gap which otherwise wouldn't have been bridged, which is an amazing thing. And that's the power that animals have, and our compassion for animals has, is it can bridge those gaps between communities which may not have common ground otherwise, which is kind of cool. And I thought that whole sort of perfect sort of mix of just like, pro-military, pro being there for those who are in extreme circumstances would, kind of led that bubble of like $60,000 being raised in 2015. $60,000, that's like a threefold increase from that $20,000. It's crazy. So I thought that was an outlier. I thought it was like, oh, well, they contributed that much. It's not going to happen next year. I'm guessing it's going to go back down. Like, I'm thinking it just happened to be the perfect charity at the perfect time, and just like, and the way it was presented itself, and et cetera, et cetera. But I was pleasantly surprised to be wrong about that, and that it wasn't just some outlier like high of a like thing and then go back down. In fact, it increased. This year they raised, what was it, 74,000-ish? Can't remember if it was 74 or 78. It was a really high number. It was about the cost of my house, as a full disclosure. Like, and that's before, like, the before mortgage thing, before down payments. Like, my entire, the home that I bought was around that price, as a full disclosure. That's a lot of frickin' money that I'm going to be spending and paying off for the good portion of the rest of my life. But y'all raised it in one weekend for these fostering homes for cats and dogs fostering homes, and allowed them to expand themselves so they can help more animals, and that is frickin' awesome. And when it comes to community, it's like, well, you need, like, I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of the elderly individuals in this country where they used to use religious organizations in order to be charitable to others. They used to, and this is what they're used to. They're used to, going out every Sunday and people contributing, their time and their money, towards small organizations within the community in order to try and help others. And I think what's happening nowadays is that hasn't gone away. I don't think the charitability, I don't think the kindness, I don't think the thing has gone away from humanity in its way. I think that we use different, we all have our different cliques and our different things, but we all, the good people within those cliques will try to do good things for one another in their own ways. It might not be sitting in a building on a Sunday morning as much as it used to be, but I think that it still occurs. It doesn't occur, and I don't think, but the thing is, like, I think the thing that concerns people the most, like, it doesn't occur as visually as it used to be. But the thing to me is, like, and the reason I kind of made that connection with the religion aspect is that you see someone like Alkali, who we'll talk about it a little bit more in a future video in this series, is he passes out this hat. Like, he'll start talking about stories about his own personal anecdotes, and it says, "Man, here, donate to the, and in order to do so, we'll donate to this little hat here." And it's like, here, you could tell, like if you want, it's like, we'll keep talking and we'll keep telling more stories a little bit beyond our time slot. But if we're going to do that, feel free, donate to this hat, and in that essence, it's sort of, in essence, as much as it's interesting that a lot of furries aren't religious in that sense. Like, there's probably like 1 in 4 are Christian, and like I think about half are agnostic or atheist. I think that was the layout. But it's interesting how some traditions from other from those more religious institutions kind of bleed into other cultures, and that is like, we're going to tell stories, we're going to have this, and hey, here, donate to this, or donate to this organization while we're doing so. It's not our organization, it's somebody else's. Whereas churches, it might be their own organization and their own methods. But it's just an interesting little sort of thing I noticed. Like this, like they're using the alkali's hat as sort of an offering plate sort of a thing. And so when you think about it like that way, it's like there's not, like, when it comes to the goodness of people, there's not so much difference as many people might think there is. It's just that people are expressing it in new and different ways. But that rambling aside, this video is talking about like communities and stuff like that, and I think that at the end of the day, like, that is the foundation of a good convention. If you have the foundation of having a social network, or of having at least some slight social network, going into it, it'll be a lot easier to deal with it. Having a backbone of a solid foundation of a good social network will make it so that if there's a lull in the convention activities, you can fall back, to the people you know, and if not, you can stand around. The cool thing about having a fursuit with it, which is that you can stand around and people will take your photo. And that's something I noticed too, is that, the first time I was there in 2011, I didn't have a fursuit. So if I had free time, I didn't really have much to do, and there wasn't really much I could do. With my free time this year, when I had a suit on, I could stand, like, leaning next to a pillar or, in a somewhat photogenic area, and just kind of, like, if I'm waiting for a panel for like 30 minutes, you can kind of stand in certain locations. And, people, come around and take photographs, or would recognize you and would greet you and stuff like that. So that's also kind of a cool thing. But that's kind of getting off topic a little bit. But I was saying, the foundation is, have a good social network of people you can trust. And that trust may take a few years to build up. So if you need to wait on, going to your first convention until you build up a good social solid network, I would heavily suggest that, because not having that network can lead to, at best, a mediocre con that you might, it's like, these furry con things are not so great, so I'm not going to go to them. At worst, somebody could exploit you, and that's a whole other can of worms, and I'm sure there's a lot of horror stories about that. But if you don't have a good solid social network, and somebody sees that you're alone, obviously somebody could take full-on advantage of that if they know you're alone and you just met them there and stuff like that. So just be cautious, be wary. So, have a good solid social network of people that actually care for you and you have some history with, of at least a year, and then go to the convention knowing that you have that network to fall back on. Because it helps protect you, and it kind of helps ensure that you have a good time. But that's just my advice. Thank you very much for listening to this Ramble. Kick that like, kick the subscribes, kick the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day, everybody. See you later.